The economic trilemma, balancing growth, inflation, and employment in a complex world. If a government seeks to maintain low inflation and high employment, it may need to accept lower levels of growth. Introduction. In the world of economics, policymakers are often faced with a delicate balancing act, much like the well-known trilemmas in other domains, such as the blockchain trilemma, decentralization, security, performance, or the camera settings trade-off between ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. The economic trilemma, involving growth, inflation, and employment, presents a similar challenge. Achieving optimal outcomes for all three indicators simultaneously is rarely possible. Understanding the interplay between these factors and the inherent trade-offs involved is crucial for developing effective economic policies that promote stability and prosperity. This discussion explores the dynamics of the economic trilemma, illustrating the patterns, rules, and limitations policymakers face in balancing growth, inflation, and employment. It also considers how innovative approaches might help navigate these trade-offs more effectively in today's complex and ever-changing global environment. Section 1. Understanding the economic indicators. Growth is typically measured by gross domestic product, GDP, which quantifies the value of all goods and services produced within an economy. Economic growth is vital because it indicates an expanding economy that can create jobs, raise living standards, and provide resources for social programs and infrastructure. However, rapid growth can also lead to overheating, where demand outstrips supply, causing inflation. Inflation represents the rate at which prices for goods and services rise. While some inflation is normal in a healthy economy, excessive inflation erodes purchasing power, reduces consumer and business confidence, and can lead to economic instability. Inflation can result from increased demand, demand pull inflation, or rising costs of production, cost push inflation. Unemployment reflects the number of people who are actively seeking work but cannot find it. Employment levels are critical for social stability and economic productivity, but they are also closely linked to growth and inflation. High employment typically supports economic growth by boosting demand, but it can also drive inflation if it leads to wage pressures and increased consumption. Section 2. The Trilemma Framework. The economic trilemma suggests that these three indicators, growth, inflation, and employment, are interdependent, and optimizing all three simultaneously is a near impossible task. Just as in the blockchain trilemma, where decentralization, security, and transaction speed cannot all be maximized at once, economic policies must often prioritize two of these factors at the expense of the third. For example, efforts to stimulate high growth and low unemployment through aggressive monetary or fiscal policy can lead to higher inflation. Conversely, policies aimed at controlling inflation may involve tightening the money supply or raising interest rates, which can stifle growth and increase unemployment. Alternatively, if a government seeks to maintain low inflation and high employment, it may need to accept lower levels of growth. These trade-offs are not just theoretical, but have played out repeatedly in economic history. The Phillips curve, for instance, historically posited an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. As unemployment decreases, inflation tends to increase, and vice versa. However, this relationship has evolved, and exceptions, such as stagflation in the 1970s, highlight the complexities of this balancing act. This content draws inspiration from the expertise of organizations such as Fidelity Investments, the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Wharton, Khan Academy, The Economist, and Deloitte. Section 3. Patterns, Rules, and Limitations in Economic Policy. While there are patterns in how these three indicators interact, there are also significant limitations. The economic trilemma is not a static equation, but a dynamic balancing act influenced by numerous factors, including external shocks, global economic conditions, and structural characteristics of the economy. Common patterns: growth versus inflation. Periods of rapid economic expansion often lead to inflationary pressures as demand for goods and services outpaces supply. Inflation versus employment. Efforts to reduce inflation by raising interest rates or tightening the money supply can slow growth and increase unemployment. Growth versus employment. Stimulating growth can reduce unemployment by creating jobs, but excessive growth can lead to inflation if the economy overheats. Limitations. Economic models that attempt to balance these indicators must contend with unforeseen events like natural disasters, pandemics, or geopolitical conflicts that disrupt markets. Policy tools often have lag effects, meaning actions taken today may not fully impact growth, inflation, or employment for months or even years. Structural factors, such as labor market rigidity or technological disruption, can change the traditional relationships between growth, inflation, and employment. Section 4. Policy Tools and Trade-offs. Policymakers use several tools to manage the economic trilemma. Monetary policy. Central banks adjust interest rates and money supply to influence inflation, growth, and employment. Lower interest rates can stimulate growth and reduce unemployment, but may lead to inflation. Conversely, higher interest rates can control inflation, but may stifle growth and increase unemployment. Fiscal policy. Governments use spending and taxation to influence economic activity. Expansionary fiscal policy, increased spending or tax cuts, can boost growth and reduce unemployment, but may increase inflation. Contractionary fiscal policy, spending cuts or tax increases, can reduce inflation, but may slow growth and increase unemployment. Structural reforms. Longer-term strategies such as labor market reforms, regulatory changes, or investments in technology and education can enhance an economy's capacity to grow sustainably without triggering inflation or unemployment spikes. These reforms are vital for managing the trilemma over the long term. Section 5. Innovating within the trilemma. Just as the blockchain world has found creative solutions like Layer 2 protocols to address its trilemma, economic policy can also innovate. New technologies, such as artificial intelligence and big data, can improve economic forecasting and policy-making precision, allowing for more targeted interventions. Furthermore, globalization, trade agreements, and international cooperation can help countries navigate their economic trilemmas by sharing resources, technology, and knowledge. However, these innovations come with their own sets of challenges and trade-offs, such as increased exposure to global economic shocks or rising inequality. Conclusion. The economic trilemma of balancing growth, inflation, and employment presents a complex challenge with no one-size-fits-all solution. While a perfect balance may be unattainable, understanding the trade-offs and employing creative, adaptive approaches can help achieve more stable outcomes. Policymakers must remain agile and responsive, using a mix of monetary, fiscal, and structural tools to navigate these interdependencies. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate the trilemma, but to manage it effectively, recognizing that in a world of constant change, flexibility and innovation are the keys to sustaining economic stability and prosperity. Call to action. Given the complexities of the economic trilemma, it's essential for economists, policymakers, and the public to engage in thoughtful debate and exploration of new ideas. As we face evolving global challenges, finding new ways to balance growth, inflation, and employment will be critical to ensuring a stable and prosperous future.